Charles Ives was guided in his work by a singular vision, that the art of music should continually be exploring new possibilities in melody, harmony, and rhythm. He railed against the prevailing musical culture of his time, describing much of popular music and even much of the classics as a massage of the ears for soft-minded adding machines in suits that consider music as a business to please old ladies. I write my music, he said, in order to strengthen one's ear muscles, mind muscles, and perhaps soul muscles. Ives frequently repeated the phrase attributed to his father, "You won't get a wild, heroic ride to heaven on pretty little sounds." Let's explore some of Ives' concepts in using various degrees of dissonance in modern music. At first, these strange sounds may strike the ear as irritating and unpleasant, but we'll try to follow Ives' lead and see if we can find an expanded sense of musical beauty amongst the debris. One way to process these uncommon sounds is to think of them as expressing complex emotions. Using dissonances, a chord can be heard expressing, for example, suspense and hope, or gloom and exuberance, or any combination of emotions. It takes a little getting used to, but the rewards are many. We'll switch to a keyboard view so you can see the notes clearly. There are 4 basic dissonant intervals that you can use when creating music. Those intervals are a minor second, an augmented fourth, a major seventh, and a flatted ninth. A minor second interval looks and sounds like this. 2 notes directly together. That's a minor second interval. The augmented fourth, also called the flatted fifth, sounds like this. It's wider, but it still has a kind of a ominous type of sound. In the medieval times, this particular interval was called the devil's interval, and music was not allowed to be played or composed that had this interval in it. So you can be sure after hours, a lot of the monks were standing around playing this interval. It's also a real strong jazz interval. Thelonious Monk, people like that, would use the flatted fifth interval for dissonance in jazz. The major seventh interval sounds like this. Very strong and very dissonant. Yeah, very creepy. It is almost Halloween, so we can use this interval a lot coming up soon. Okay, the most dissonant interval is a flatted ninth. Sounds like this. How are your ears doing so far? Charles Ives would use these dissonances in various ways, and he would use them, for example, to create a mildly dissonant chord sometimes, like this. And here we have the major seventh on the top and bottom, and we have a major second interval in the middle. So this chord will be considered a mild dissonance, but if you use any one of these dissonant intervals in your chord, it's going to have some degree of dissonance. This could be kind of a jazz chord. It has that dissonance of the major seventh, or it could be something from Gershwin, for example. Here's another example of a mildly dissonant chord using our dissonant intervals. We have a nice little bite on the bottom, so to speak, with a minor second interval and then a perfect fourth. And this one again wouldn't be too dissonant for most people, but it still has a nice little bite to it. Here's another one that's a little more dissonant. That one has a minor second on the bottom and then a fourth above it. This is more dissonant. If we exclusively use the dissonant intervals, we can come up with stronger dissonances, which Charles Ives did quite frequently. Let's say if we put 2 minor second intervals together and played that chord That's a very dissonant chord. Up an octave, it sounds a little different. You'll notice that we're thinking of creating chords not based on the fact that we're in the key of C or that it should follow a certain progression, but that we're simply thinking of using dissonant intervals together in different combinations. Here's another one that uses augmented fourths. Down an octave, it's even more dissonant. This one kind of sounds like right before a tornado. Still very expressive in its own way. You can try to hear the beauty in it. As Charles Ives said, it takes a while to get used to, but it really is rewarding for many of us to be able to open ourselves to these type of sounds and get used to them. Our next dissonant technique is called stacked intervals. Ives used this technique to create bigger dissonant chords. The way you use stacked intervals is you preset an interval, for example, a major or a minor third, and then you construct a big chord using this interval any way you like. Here's an example of a chord that uses major and minor thirds in stacked intervals. Very strongly dissonant. Up an octave, a little bit different. Ah, that's beautiful. Let's try another one. This is more dissonant. Here we have a minor third, a major third, a minor third, a major third, a major third, a minor third, and a major third. That's really strongly dissonant. And we'll try one more. Major third, minor third, minor third, minor third, major third, minor third. Also very strong. I'll explain how to use these to create music in just a moment, but I'd like you to hear these kind of crazy sounds and see if you can find the beauty in it. Yeah, very complex. Let's try stacking thirds and seconds. Here we have thirds in the left hand, seconds in the right hand. Automatically you get that kind of cringy feeling that tells you we're in Dissonantville. Woo! That's a strong one. Anytime you use seconds, it gets very tightly tense. Not so bad up here. More dissonant here. This is definitely horror movie territory. Let's try another one of seconds and thirds. Not as dissonant. But I'm just trying all kinds of different possibilities, and when I'm creating music, I can do anything to get the degree of tension that I want to get at any moment. Changing one note will vastly change the degree of tension. Here we're going to use one more of seconds and thirds stacked. That one's not so dissonant. It's a nice kind of a movie chord. Let's try thirds and fourths. Fourths on the bottom, fourth and a third. I like that one. It's nice when you hold them. You can really feel the complexity of the emotion that's conveyed by each of these chords when you hold them. Let's try another one with thirds and fourths. Yeah, that one's stronger. That's during a tornado. And we'll try one more. Whew, that's strong. That's a real good Ives chord. Sometimes you'd hit it percussively for added effect. Okay, one more, and that is just using seconds. This is the most dissonant of all. Whew! This chord is going to put hair on your teeth. Not so bad up an octave, but we created this amazing dissonance by stacking different seconds, major and minor seconds, together. And it can be very arbitrary. You can just try stacking them in any different kind of way. See what kind of dissonant sound you get and choose the one that expresses just the right amount of tension for what you're looking for at that moment in the music. We'll try one more of these. That one I really like. That one's not so dissonant. Could be like a Debussy chord. Okay. That's the use of stacked intervals. An interesting concept. Next, we're going to look into the concept of bi-tonality. When Charles Ives was a boy, his father used to have him sing Swanee River, for example, in the key of C, and play an accompaniment in the key of A. That's kind of crazy. Most of us play, of course, most of the time, in the same key. This really sounds like a relief now. But if we, for example, play a melody in the key of D while playing the accompaniment in the key of C, it has a really nutty sound. And the further you get away from the key of C, in this case in the left hand, the more dissonant it becomes. So this is a nice example of C in the left hand and D in the right hand. Thank you, Charles Ives. Sometimes Charles Ives would play a melody that moved one measure in one key and the next measure in another key. Let's try the third in the right hand against the one in the left hand. The further you get away, the more dissonant it is. Yeah, it's a little bit like seasickness. But Charles Ives would use these kind of techniques to shock us and to get us out of hearing music the way we usually do. Why not? Now we're going to try the flat fifth, which is even more intense. Charles Ives would frequently hear, where he lived in Connecticut, there would be two different bands playing at different parts of the park or different parts of a big field, let's say. And the two different bands would be playing totally different tunes in different keys at the same time. And Charles Ives' mind was such that he would put those two together, and a lot of the music he left for us is a musical picture of two bands playing at the same time in different keys. Let's try from the flat six on the right hand. And the last one is the most dissonant. Get ready for a nice 7 against 1. Woo! That is some strong stuff, man. Haha, fantastic. The last dissonant technique I'll share with you is called a 12-tone split. And Charles Ives would, again, use this one a lot. And this is when he really wanted to bring out all the guns of dissonance. What he would do is he would try to play all 12 notes of the chromatic scale together at the same time. Sometimes he'd play it all together, and sometimes he might break it up into a couple of groups. Playing 6 notes at the same time using 2 notes on the thumb is one way you can do this on the piano. So here's an example of 6 notes of the chromatic scale. Ah, lovely. Here's an example of the other 6 notes played in the right hand. Wow. Now, sometimes Charles Ives would play one and then answer it with the other. And there's subliminally, you're going to hear that all the notes of the chromatic scale are being used. But it's certainly an amazing sound to hear. Sometimes he would use it all together. Woo! Sometimes he might spread it out like this. It's not far off from the Schoenberg technique of 12-tone rows, but Charles Ives would do it usually in a much more thicker kind of a way. He would go through those 12 intervals much quicker. Woo! It's like a piano falling down the stairs. Yeah, Charles Ives was too much, man. Before we leave this mini clinic on using dissonances, I thought I'd show you some techniques of how you might put some dissonances together to create music, create compositions or improvisations. The most common way to do this is to let the melody guide the music. So we want to think of creating a melody using a combination of steps and leaps. Again, we're not thinking that we're playing in a certain key. This is definitely atonal. But it could be used in a tonal way too. Now what we want to use beneath the melody, in one instance we'll call a constant structure. Constant structure is when you have one structure like this, made up of some dissonant intervals, and you keep that structure the same and use it to support the melody, which is going to be on top and brought out louder. That's called constant structure. And Charles Ives would use that frequently to get dissonance sounding like music. In order to make music, you need ordered tones. And this is one way that you can order them in a non-traditional format. The other way I'd like to show you is called common tone. So we have constant structure where we use the same structure to make melodies. Now common tone is where we keep a lot of the notes of the chord the same, change it a little bit, and have the melody on the top, something like this. We can add melody notes and then use a lot of the same notes from chord to chord. This is called common tone, and we can use it to make these dissonances sound like music. Let's try a little bit more of it. We can use these dissonant techniques in many different ways when we're creating or improvising music. You can create a whole piece using these extremely dissonant textures. You can just use these dissonant textures and sounds for part of a piece. If you're scoring a film, for example, you can use the dissonant concepts in tense parts of the film. Your imagination is really the limit. So when you want to try to use some of these dissonant techniques, explore using different degrees of stacked intervals and use common tone and constant structure, and your ear will be absolutely revolutionized. Okay. Thank you for hanging in there with me. We're going to turn to some of Ives's music now and listen to some of his pieces in the order of increasing dissonance. I thought it would be fun to relate a little story about this dissonant music to you. When I was about 18, I was first exposed to these kind of sounds, and I used to spend hours at a time trying different stacked intervals and common tones and just having a ball. And I used to practice in the basement of the house where we're living on Long Island. And I remember having a 2-hour session of dissonant exploration, and I was thrilled and ecstatic about how it sounded and all the great sounds that I thought I was making. And I came up from the basement, and my mom was sitting at the kitchen table, and there were tears streaming down her cheeks. Yeah, the moral is you have to be careful about who you play these for. After that incident, they built me a studio in the basement where we had walls the thickness of Fort Knox. So she never had to listen to it again. But it is fun, and I think you'll have fun with it too.